In the past 2 years, Ethiopia has tried several angles to obtain, not just access, mind you, but to obtain the Eritrean port of Assab. And it actually has tried several angles, including a media blitz, diplomatic pressure, which includes lectures and sometimes warnings, sometimes some kind of justifications, some historical narratives, which includes about ancient unity and empires and where the borders used to be ancient time ago, long time ago. Some kind of security framing where it talks about its national survival, its existential need, sometimes even its need to breathe. Some economic framings about its growing economy and the development needs and the population growth. Some kind of regional framing for the Horn of Africa, for stability. And then at the end of the day, asking the international community, the regional community, to pressure Eritrea into negotiating. Not negotiating legally, but negotiating with an expectation to hand over its what is rightfully its sovereign territory. Now, what do all this have in common? What they have in common is they are not legal. They're not. It's not going to the international courts. It's not using international laws to win an argument. It's using all sorts of tactics, including the threat of force, of course, the threat of war, the threat of violence, many other angles as well. But at the end of the day, so far, they all have been political, but none of them could be considered like a legal procedure. And it makes you wonder, why not? Or is that the next step? Is that the one that is remaining? Is that the next angle that Ethiopia will be trying? And in today's presentation, what I'm about to say is not really, because it can't. And I'll explain why. Welcome to the program. So as a reminder, for the last couple of years, we heard it all the angles that I mentioned, and they include something like this.
In Eritrea, the Assab port is emerging as a potential new flashpoint in these rising tensions. Located on the Red Sea coast, the port city was used by Ethiopia for its import and export needs prior to 1993 and Eritrea's formal independence. Addis Ababa has spoken of its natural right to access the sea. The call for international mediation.
All right, let's notice a couple of things here. They include that they used to administer it, history, pre-independent Eritrea, and more importantly, whatever it means, this natural right. Now, one of the things that we will be looking at is this so-called natural right to access. Is it actually, does the international law or does the international community recognize that? That's the bottom line, because otherwise you can make anything. You can talk about history, you can talk about many other angles, but we just heard a couple of things, but past history, you used to own it, used to administer it. Is that actually a legal basis? And whatever natural right means. Let's keep going.
Amid claims of natural rights over the sea from Addis Ababa, Eritrea views this as a potential threat to sovereignty and a violation of the balance outlined in the 2018 peace agreement.
Now, to put it simply, what Eritrea is saying is it's definitely a violation of its sovereign rights. That is the international law, and it's referring to at least the peace agreement in 2018. At least the reporter is saying that, even though the basis is actually way stronger than that. So that is one angle. And let's take a look, just as a reminder, at a couple of other angles. This gentleman is Major General Bajadebele. He is currently serving as the Ethiopia's ambassador to Kenya. Let's hear what he has to say.
አሰብ የኢትዮጵያ ነች ያልነው አሰብ የኢትዮጵያ ስለሆነች ነው 100% ፒሪየድ በተንኮልና በሸፍጥ አስመራና አዲስ አበባ ሆናችሁ ወስዳቸዋል ያኔ የተናገራቸው የለም በዛን ጊዜ የሚናገር ሰው አንገቱ ይቆረጣል አማራ እንደሚተርተው ደረቃቅ ጉሮሮ ይቀዳል። ምን ማለት ነው? መቼ ለማን የት ልናገር የሚል ነገር ነበር ጄኔሬሽኑ የሚጠብቀው። አሁን ደግሞ የኢትዮጵያን አሰብ የሚያስመልስ ጄኔሬሽን ነው ያለው። ስልጣን ላይ ያለው መንግስት የዚህ ጄኔሬሽን ነው። በጠቅላላ የኢትዮጵያ ህዝብ በዚህ ተግባብተዋል። አሰብ የኛ ነው አይደለም። አሁን ጥያቄው እንዴት ነው የምንመልሰው ነው። ስለዚህ አዎ በጉልበት ነው የወሰዳችሁት። በጉልበት የወሰዳችሁትን በጉልበት ይመለሳል ክፉ ከመጣ። ነገር ግን በጉልበት ለመመለስ
Now, whatever he means, but I know you can see from the transcript what he was talking about. But at the end of the day, is what he is saying legal? Because today's what we are going to examine is whatever Ethiopia or those who are speaking on behalf of Ethiopia are saying, is it actually legally doable? In this few minutes or less than a minute, he just mentioned a bunch of things. He mentioned that you took that by force. He's referring to Ethiopia, to Eritrea, to the port of Assab. So therefore, we have the right to take it back. The right, or we will. Now, whatever he's talking about, is it legal? Obviously, it's a threat of force, and he's a soldier, even though he's actually currently serving as a diplomat. But at the end of the day, what he's saying is, we will do that. But the question for all of us today is, can Ethiopia do that and then make that legally acceptable by the international system? He's referring to the way it was taken, therefore he doesn't agree with the way it was done, so he has the right to do it. This is every man to himself, world of chaos. But at the end of the day, is that doable today? That's what we're going to be talking about. And then he also mentions that the new generation of Ethiopians, the new is not, and he says that's not the old generation that lost Assab. So therefore, this new generation is ready to take it back. Bottom line, can one country or can anyone say, okay, you cheated our past generation, but this new generation is ready to take it back? Is that legally doable? We're not even going to wonder, is that legal? Because there is an international system. Obviously, the short answer is it's not acceptable, it's not legal. But can they actually make it happen? Can they, let's say they use force to obtain it, can they keep it legally? That's what we're going to be talking about. Let's also, for just a good measure, look at one more angle. Okay, let's also take a look at this.
The mistrust is no longer confined to the past. At the heart of this unraveling relationship lies a deeper fracture: Ethiopia's continued bid for access to the Red Sea.
The issue of the Red Sea is a matter of survival for Ethiopia. Whether the Prosperity Party is here or not, or whether this house is here or not, a nation of 130 million whose economy is rapidly growing cannot stay locked up. It can't.
Analysts warn that another Ethiopia-Eritrea conflict would not remain confined. The UN.
All right, I guess let's going back to the main point. Is this what now? He also mentioned that they need it. Their population is growing. All sorts of certification, and you heard everything in the last couple of years. Again, instead of making speeches and interviews, all Ethiopia has to do is make a case within the international system legally. It hasn't done that yet. So, bottom line is my main point today will be to make the case that this is actually not doable for Ethiopia. And let me make it as simple and as straight as I can. But what I want you to do is not just I'm not just jumping to a conclusion. I will be making my case, but I want you to compare what I say here, and after you finish the rest of the video, if you find gaps in the argument that for Ethiopia there is no legal case, that's the reason the Ethiopian government hasn't taken that yet. But here's my conclusion. Let me say it as simple and as clearly and without any emotion or as logically as possible. There is no legal pathway for Ethiopia, as I keep saying, because all what it's been doing so far, let's say it twists arms and it puts pressure or it starts a war or it does what it thinks it needs to do, but at the end of the day it has to legalize what it wants to do or get what it wants legally. So legally it's not possible. All other ways yet to be seen, but at the end of the day legally not possible. And now if it is legally not possible and if the Ethiopian government hasn't taken that step yet, then why talk about it? Because I think a lot of people, mostly Ethiopians, but a lot of people actually think it is possible because they confuse, at the end of the day, they are confusing access with sovereignty. And they're intermingling the two. Sometimes they talk about it's our natural right as part of the international community to access it, not only to access the Red Sea as it allows, to access any sea for that matter, but to own it, to have the sovereignty of it. Sometimes they talk about the fairness doctrine, where, well, Eritrea has 2 ports, why can't we have one? There is that argument. But at the end of the day, there is still confusion that Ethiopia can still do that and make it stick. Or some of them also wonder, who cares about the international community? If we get it, we get it, because that's how we ruled Eritrea for 30 years by force. So why not do that again? That's also, again, it doesn't mean it is legal, but at least in that past, using the federation and abolishing the federation, it actually went through some legal process to obtain Eritrea. But the question today is, can you do with ASAP today and get away with it, or actually win that argument? Bottom line is the international law, at the end of the day, doesn't work like that. It fully protects Eritrea. And not because Eritrea is special, because that's how it works. And no matter what country, not even the largest ones, not even the most powerful nations in the world have the right to just go to another country because they want a coastline or they want something from it and just take it over. And as simple as this, not the United States, not China, not Russia, not anybody can do that legally. They may try to do it illegally or by force or ignore everyone and try to do it, but it's not even possible for the United States and for the Russians and the Chinese and all these powerful countries to do that. But definitely, absolutely not for Ethiopia. So at the end of the day, we're going to be talking about a few of the legal stuff, but I know, legal mambo jumbo and international laws can sound very, very boring. Trust me, it's not. It's actually very simple. We just have to say, okay, we don't need to know the whole thing. We just need to know the bottom line. Is one thing possible versus the other, and what are the rights? And more importantly, it's not about winning an argument. If Ethiopia can't enforce what it's trying to do legally using the international system, what is then acceptable? What is it supposed to do? What is left? Does it mean that it's all avenues are shut down? Well, obviously, sea access, doing what normal countries do, doing what it does with Djibouti, doing legal access is, of course, always available to Ethiopia, always been ready from Eritrea since 1991, actually, forget 93, even before that. And that's always on the table. But yet, it chooses to do other things that it cannot even legally make happen. So we'll make that case, even though the reason Ethiopia hasn't done that yet, because the legal strategy, they know it's dead on arrival. And then it makes you wonder, if it is not legally acceptable in the international community, then what is the Ethiopian government doing? Why is it fooling the Ethiopian people? Why is it making chaos and not only for Ethiopia, Eritrea, but throughout the region? Why is it embroidering the community, the Horn of Africa, into a war situation? Yet to be seen. But at the end of the day, we're not going to be talking about what their motive is, who is behind them, what the conspiracy is. Let's stick to the subject matter today. Is it legally doable for Ethiopia? Well, Ethiopia can receive access to the sea, but it can't own the port of Assab. It can't own something that belongs to Eritrea. I mean, Somalia can speak for itself. Other countries can speak for themselves if that's what it's trying to do with them. But strictly, we are talking about Assab. So let's keep going. And so the question is, how do we know, or how do I know that Ethiopia is not pursuing any legal process as we speak through the system, through the international system? Simply put, because Ethiopia has not filed any case at any court where this kind of things are argued, or if you bring a legal case, in this case they will have to say, okay, Eritrea is not giving us or not handing over what Ethiopia is asking for. Eritrea is whatever they want to say. Of course, they can, if they confuse it. I mean, if they can't confuse international leaders, international lawyers about Eritrea is not giving us sea access, and the access what is allowed, what Eritrea already said it was already ready to do so. They're not going to say that, but point blank, they are claiming ownership over sovereign Eritrean port, and they haven't taken any of that to any of the international courts. So what are those? What are courts are we talking about? There is the one that countries go to, the International Court of Justice, the ICJ. There is no, if anybody can actually say that there is actually, that this is wrong, that there's actually a case filed, they're welcome to point that out, but none. I don't think you can find that. And the reason is because they know they have no case there. But anyone who thinks that something rightfully belongs to them, the first thing they do is file a lawsuit, and countries also do that. And these are some of the where they go for arbitration, for what have you. Again, with the Permanent Court of Arbitration, sometimes I know I don't even understand myself how the ICJ and the PCA and where do you start, where do you finish. Bottom line is there is nothing going on with all this. With the International Tribunal for the Law of the Seas, which is the UNCLOS, actually the UN Law of the Seas, is where countries agree and sign the treaty and abide by the rules of it. And then when they have dispute, they go to this court, whatever they call the Law of the Seas Court. Nothing like that. Anyway, not to complicate things, but Eritrea hasn't signed that treaty. Ethiopia has not signed that treaty, but at the end of the day, it kind of applies to them. It just encourages them to work together so that they can have sea access, not ownership, not territory, not where the bigger or the larger country can do whatever it wants or make an. It's not made of that. The law of the sea is basically to encourage access. You rent, you buy, you pass through, so that landlocked countries, are not blocked from the international waters, because they have to go through the coastal countries to do that. It's as simple as that. Again, there's the bigger United Nations Security Council. Talk about all this security for Ethiopia and all the threats of war. If any country is threatened by war, and they actually made some security complaint in the Security Council a few months ago against Eritrea, it wasn't about, hey, international community, hey, UN Security Council, Eritrea is not playing nice. Eritrea is not handing over the port of Assab. is not given us. That's not what they said. What they said is just some made up story about Eritrea is poor us. Eritrea is about creating chaos, and it's getting ready to invade us again. If they have legal case, that's not what they would have said. In fact, at the UN General Assembly, the president of Ethiopia, when he made his speech, other than talk about this right of access, which Eritrea is not denying, he didn't talk about the legal case for Ethiopia to have access. So, not at the General Assembly, as we saw, not at the UN Security Council, and more importantly, African Union is right there with them. Nothing there as well. There is no legal process. In African Union, the AU has legal forums for something like this. When countries have disputes, literally in Addis Ababa, they start their process. By the way, I'm not even sure if the legal forums are done in Addis Ababa, but what I know is the AU is right there in Addis Ababa, and they haven't started a case against Eritrea for not giving them their rightful port of Assab. They haven't done that. So why haven't they done that? Because they don't have a case. Let's look at the big why. The big why is because it's not. I don't blame them for not going to court, by the way, because if you don't have a case and you go to court, other than embarrassing yourself and also getting legally defeated once and for all, because they will shut the case. That's what happened in the past with the Algiers agreement, with the last 100 years. We can mention a few, and we will. At the end of the day, Ethiopia, like all other countries, have no legal right to make a claim just by declaring it. Why? Because the international law does not recognize any right to sea access through land grab. Yes, you have even the other right is by playing nice, by asking your neighbors, your coastal countries, to allow you through their land, to be nice enough to do that. Otherwise, it's not about twisting arms. It's not about I have the right to access and I have the right to take land, because it doesn't recognize that. It never has and it never will. Because if it does, it's not about Ethiopia accessing the Red Sea or Ethiopia accessing any ocean. It is the entire international system would collapse. One of them, the main one, is the UN. I mean, we're talking about United Nations 101 here, but Article 2, Paragraph 4 of the UN Charter. What makes the UN UN? It talks about, it's not about landlocked countries. It's more important than that. And as you can see here, all members, including Ethiopia, they shall refrain from, in their international relations, from the threat to use force. But we just saw the Major General literally threatening Eritrea to use force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state, or in any other manner inconsistent with the purpose of the United Nations. Do we even have to say that? But literally, when Ethiopia is making a claim, it is violating one of the tenets of the United Nations. We forget the other treaties about, African Union and the agreement between Ethiopia and Eritrea. Let's forget that. But this is part of what makes the world the world. And Abiy Ahmed thinks he's man enough to just ignore this. Does he have what it takes to actually make it legally stick, so he can go to the UN and say, forget Article 2, Paragraph 4. We are Ethiopia and this is ours. Deal with it. He's not going to be able to do that because he can't. And no landlocked countries, Ethiopia is not the only locked country, can actually do that. So the UN Charter prevents crazy landlocked countries, or any other crazy countries for that matter, to do this and get away with it. Let's go to the next point. And the next point is, okay, if legally you can do that, and then what is allowed? And isn't what Ethiopia is doing allowed or permitted to do that? The bottom line is, as far as what we are talking about, let's keep it simple. There may be many, but let's stick with three. Legally, Ethiopia can lease a port from Eritrea legally, but remember, not without permission of Eritrea, not with all the things that we have seen the last couple of years, or not to mention the last 3 decades, not to mention the last 80 years. There was a simpler way. Ethiopia could always have leased a port from Eritrea or convince Eritrea to let it lease its ports. It hasn't. As a matter of fact, it does not even have a lease, and it never had a lease with Djibouti. What they have is access agreement, which is different from the kind of lease Djibouti has with China and the United States and France and so on. And it did not even do that with Ethiopia, because they know they are not worthy for that. But at the end of the day, legally, Ethiopia has that option. Now we're talking about what are the legal ways. If you can't grab something legally, what can you do? You can lease, or the second thing is you can purchase. It's almost unheard of in today's age, but a country can actually take a piece of its territory and sell it to whoever is buying it. We have a few examples we're going to be talking about later, but that is almost mission impossible, and we haven't heard that in probably a century. But that's a legal way of getting something between two countries. And the third one is, and we have a lot of good examples of that, is the joint ownership, some kind of system. And they joint own the port facility or the port operations. Some kind of deal is made. But even in that scenario, there's a country that allows it, the coastal country, the one who actually legally owns it, but the two can make a deal about some kind of economic zone, free zone, and we heard that a lot. In fact, between Eritrea and Ethiopia, the hope was that the two countries would do that. But this a zillion other ways that Ethiopia thinks it can actually do and get away with always gets in the way. Again, let's stick with the topic. So if it can't do that, if there are if you can't threaten and you can't use force and you can't pressure or use other exceptions like we need it for development, we need it for because history said so, or our security and future growth said so, they are not. None of them are legal functions. But these are the ones that we are looking at are lease is, purchase is, joint ownership is. So if that is the case, the smart and intelligent people in the Ethiopian leadership, and I which means I know they know, we know they know, we know this is so basic. Anybody, including myself, can just figure it out without having to study international relations or international law or the law of the seas or be an international geopolitical expert for that matter. This is just basic. It's like if you can't rent, if you can't buy or rent or have some kind of commercial agreement in a building, can you just grab it? You don't jump to that. Can you just claim it? Even common sense says that is illegal, and in the international system, I think at the end of the day, it's as simple as that. Especially with what we are talking about. So. Why not? Because again, I keep repeating, but we have to keep hammering that. Because what Ethiopia is asking for is it's the handover. They're saying territorial transfer. It's not let us use it. It's like Eritrea, this is your territory now. Now hand it over. So the forcible handover of a territory is simply not allowed. by the way, if I can go one step back quickly, in history, just to show how rare things are. The last country to actually purchase, which is extremely real, because let's just eliminate the purchase right out of the way, is the U.S. buying the Virgin Islands from Denmark over 100 years ago in 1917. They bought it for 25 million. So if you go back 100 years ago, maybe you missed your chance. I don't know if Eritrea was for sale, or if anybody was ready to sell that to Ethiopia. But anyway, jokes aside, nothing is for sale today, and nothing will be ever. So forget but in the entire world, in the history of the world, the last purchase transfer from one country to the other was the 1917 Virgin Islands transfer. Before that was even farther, the 1867, when the U.S. purchased Alaska from Russia. So don't start counting your money yet if you think you can collect money and buy that. And then, of course, there's the Louisiana Purchase and other purchases. So let's forget purchasing for now. But leases are more frequent. China leased some port from Sri Lanka for 100 years. We hear that. That's legal, and that's agreement. Whatever China leased from Sri Lanka, it doesn't mean it owns it. It leased it. At the end of the day, at the end of the lease, it will be returned to Sri Lanka. So Sri Lanka still maintains sovereignty over what is already leased. It didn't sell it. It just leased it. It's like renting it. Not to mention, let's not even go too far. Djibouti leases its ports, and it's for military bases, for commercial bases, to a bunch of countries. I'm not actually sure why it didn't do that with Ethiopia, but we know there are a bunch of bases there, including the US and China and France and Italy and Japan, and all of them operate bases. And it also offered actually Ethiopia some lease recently. I don't know why Ethiopia didn't even take that, because I think it's all about, at the end of the day, even though our focus today is not that, it's just about sinister motive, not to only take the port of Assab back, but to take Eritrea back, to erase Eritrea's independence. That's what all this is leading to. But again, can you do it legally is what we are discussing too. Otherwise, they could have leased something from Djibouti, they could have leased something from Somalia and all the other access they have. But speaking of leases, even Djibouti is open-minded enough to do that with many countries, and repeatedly. I'm not even sure at this time what is available for Ethiopia in terms of options, but that is one of those ones. Now, joint ownership. I hope one day there will be a sane government in Ethiopia, and unfortunately, we haven't done that. We haven't done that yet. We haven't seen that one, where a lot of countries throughout the world, they create some kind of win-win situation, an economic zone, instead of one trying to dominate the other. In our case, I don't think we have a history of Eritrea trying to dominate Ethiopia ever, because it doesn't even make sense. But we could have done what Singapore and Malaysia are doing, what China does with a bunch of countries, including Sri Lanka, which just mentioned, but with this port zones with Kazakhstan and a bunch of other Southeast Asian countries, what the UAE itself does with Oman and the ports that they control together. Even I think Jordan and Israel do something like that, and all over Europe, I'm sure they do that. So this is how mature countries do it. But always, I don't know if it's the warrior mentality or the war mentality or the empire mentality of Ethiopian leaders, they could never bring themselves to see that them doing that with Eritrea. That's why it's part of the legal avenue, but for some reason they keep they don't want to cross that at all. So let's keep going. So if territorial integrity, or a territorial transfer is not in the play for Ethiopia, and forced territorial transfer basically means, Article 2 of the UN is being violated. It's as simple as that. So nothing. You can call it many other things, but what Ethiopia is claiming is the territorial transfer. But at the end of the day, we looked at the Article 2, Paragraph 4 of the UN. The African Union protects it. Eritrea, at the end of the day, from all these different angles that we see, it is absolutely, totally protected by the international system. Yeah, the onus is actually, the legal onus is not on Eritrea. It's on Ethiopia. But Eritrea is member of it's recognized by the international community. It's accepted by the international community. Respect the process that Eritrea went through is accepted and respected to this day. And the only way for this to change is for Eritrea to voluntarily say, I don't want this protection anymore. I don't want any of these rights anymore. I'm going to willingly hand over my sovereignty. That's the only legal way. Now, what are the chances that will happen? 0. But let's mention a few of how strong the legal, because we were sticking with legality today, how strong Eritrea's legal protection is. By the way, it was supposed to be also the same thing for Ethiopia, but we are talking about how strong the treaty, the treaties, the international laws, and the systems, and every angle that you see legally protects Eritrea. So anyway, this is not going to be a lecture about history, but legally speaking, the treaty of 1900, the Treaty of Addis Ababa, that's Emperor Menelik, and the other gentleman is Major General Fernandino Martini. So in 1900, he was actually, at that time, he was the governor of Eritrea. They had a treaty. It basically says where the borders of Eritrea will be, because they were next door neighbors with Ethiopia. And Emperor Menelik signed that. And that is considered a treaty. That's a legal. If Eritrea is going to make a case about its border and when it was making its case for independence, and something like this was already part of the process. In fact, I'm not 100% sure, but I'm very sure. That when the border ruling was done in 2002, something like this was definitely used. The maps, the treaties, because that's what the border is based on. The shape of the border, where it was drawn. The colonial borders all over Africa are full of treaties like this. So anyway, so we have the 1900 treaty that was Emperor Menelik signed. Let's move on to the next treaty, the 1908 treaty. A few years later, for some reason, I'm not familiar with the exact reason, the demarcation, just like we've been doing the demarcation with Ethiopia forever, and unfortunately we had to repeat that 100 years later as well. But another treaty was signed with Addis Ababa, this time with Giuseppe Felizano. I think he was the ambassador of Italy to Ethiopia, to Addis Ababa. He may have been actually ambassador of Italian Eritrea. Whatever he was, it was between Italy and Ethiopia. And once again, Emperor Menelik signed that deal as well. I kind of like Emperor Menelik so far, because he seems to like to know where the border is. At the end of the day, I wish all Ethiopians actually sat down and signed deals with Eritrea and treaties with Eritrea and borders with Eritrea, and the world would be a much better place than we have now. Now let's jump to what matters. The Eritrean referendum of 1993, obviously that made a lot of things possible. Then, because Eritrea decisively won the war, it was able to actually convince the international community that the Eritreans' voice have to be heard, and the international supervised referendum was conducted. Long details, topic for another day. But at the end of the day, our vote in Eritrea and the countries of the world accepting it is what makes Eritrea or Eritrea recognized by the international system. So they took the results of the referendum as the voice of the Eritrean people, and the endorsement of all these countries as recognizing it. But formally, a resolution has to pass at the UN in 1993. But this is just following 1993. I believe maybe about less than a month after the Eritrean people voted, and that's when the Eritrean flag was hoisted at the UN, and it is still flying to this day. So, but that is part of a legal. When they accepted Eritrea, that is not, they didn't just accept a name and a flag. It also includes a territory and a map, and that shows what Eritrea is and where Eritrea is. So for 35 years or this many years later, 33 years later, for Ethiopia to come to say, to challenge that resolution, it is pretty stupid. But legally speaking, Ethiopia is not being stupid because it hasn't taken the legal process yet. Because if it did, that would be stupid. But the point here is Eritrea is fully protected with laws and treaties. For the sake of brevity, and anybody can just Google the United Nations General Assembly UNGA resolution 47-230 of 1993, which basically welcomed Eritrea. And there's a process, there's a legal process. That's our topic today. And the legal process is that Eritrea submitted its case and its application for membership at the UN, and it was accepted. And all they have to do is pass that motion to say, here we have decided to admit the state of Eritrea to membership in the United Nations. That was on the 28th of May, 1993. And the rest is history. And the rest will be history forever. What Ethiopia is trying to do is challenge that resolution. But if it does, if it wants to do, all it has to do is send its ambassadors to the UN and make that. It's not doing that because it can't, because it does not have a case. Let's move on to the next topic. So May 28, 1993, after that resolution, hopefully nothing was necessary after that. If the world was a fair place, that would have been the end of Eritrea's journey to be a rightful member of the international community. But it wasn't going to do that. It actually had to keep on proving, because Ethiopians found some loophole to make a case to say we have a border issue and a border disagreement, and then the border has to be demarcated, and the chaos and death of what happened between 1998 and 2000. But since we're going to be talking about just legal stuff today, another treaty, another agreement that protects Eritrea is the Algiers Agreement of 2000. And this between Eritreans and Ethiopians for the last, at least since that agreement, 25 years, for the last quarter of a century, all we've been arguing about, it seems to be, is that. And as I was preparing for this, and I actually arrived at the picture that you see here, it was a kind of actually infuriating, because a lost opportunity of the last 25 years, when it was once again legally done, once again legally settled, where the prime minister of Ethiopia, Meles Zenawi, and president of Eritrea, Isaias Afwerki, they sat down with all these international witnesses in Algeria, saying that, okay, finally, it's not about the 2-year war, but every dispute that they had, because they had to include all these treaties that we were talking about, the 1900, the 1902, the 1908, and maps and satellite images and a lot of historical archives and witnesses. And finally, this was going to be the new beginning. But again, Ethiopians know it, we know it, the whole world know it. It's not Eritrea who did not want to pursue the legal way of doing things again. But the reason I'm saying that, when I saw this picture, I was infuriated, even though I want to stick to non-emotional legal stuff today, is when I actually looked at the flags on the desk. And what we have from left to right is the OAU flag, which means for every flag, there's a representative there. A witness, actually, these are witnesses. They are not just there for the photo op. They are literally saying, I hereby witness this agreement. And they were not only witnesses, they were also guarantors that if this agreement is violated, that they will do something about it. Anyway, left to right, the OAU, the Organization of African Unity, before it became the African Union. Here it is. The next one, the big one, the United States. Next one, the host, its president right there standing in between, Algeria. Obviously, Eritrea and Ethiopia, their flags are represented. Then the big kahuna, the United Nations, saying that we guarantee, you agree to this, there will be peace. You agree to this, the parties, will make sure that it happens, because they were witnesses. Then the next one, even bigger one, the European Union, with all its member countries. And then there is the African witnesses, Nigeria and little Togo. All sorts of mix, from little to big. This is when, once again, they said, Eritrea, don't worry. If you accept this, Ethiopia, don't worry. If you accept this, we'll be here for you. Ethiopia used a bunch of loopholes, and which drags us for the next 20 years. But for anybody who doesn't understand Eritrea, or doesn't understand much of Eritrean history, or why Eritrea is actually the way it is, it boils down to this. In fact, I call it, this explains why Eritrea and Eritreans have anger issues, why they have trust issues. And when, again, another wave of lies and deceits come the way it is doing now, again, breaking the law and breaking agreements and trying to do it outside the normal legal process, that's why Eritreans are saying, no, never again. It's not going to happen. And even to this, they found their own solution to it. And fortunately, Abiy Ahmed he said in 2018, 18 years later, he says, no more, we're not going to fool around this time. We mean it. And he came and he signed more agreements. But his agreement, the agreement that he signed in Asmara, the agreement that he signed in Jeddah, they reinforce this. But at the end of the day, they, legally speaking, I will leave that to our experts. It does not add much to it. It's just saying that from here on, we will play nicer. But it wasn't a new treaty that needed to be signed. It was basically saying that there will be a new atmosphere, and there will not be, it was more or less like a promise not to play dirty again. Unfortunately, 2 years later, we are back at that. But again, does Ethiopia have a legal case that can actually take this back, take that back? But even if they twist their words, even if Abiy Ahmed said, okay, in 2018, I said I will accept the Algiers Agreement, I don't want to accept the Algiers Agreement anymore. It doesn't matter because it's already done. It's final and binding. You don't need to add or subtract to it. And if you did, it doesn't matter. It's not up to you. So that being the case, what about, because they can't legally talk about between what happened between 1991, 1993, the referendum preparation years, and then everything leading to today. There is no legal crack or anything that they can use against Eritrea to make a case, to make a claim. It's all shut down. That's why even in the narration, it's all about this historical zone, historical empire. That's why Abiy Ahmed jumped to Alula Banega and the Aksum Empire, and in addition to his crazy water flows from Ethiopia to the Mediterranean and then to the Red Sea. So therefore, I must have Assab argument, that silly argument. But it was this: we are one people historical empire claim. Ethiopia is not the only one in the world, by the way, to do that. Since the history of mankind, countries have been doing that forever. But what does the international law say about historical empires? And again, I want to especially challenge those international law experts. But my conclusion is this: international law does not require empires, period. End of story. If anybody wants to take this and say, no, but it does, you're welcome to lecture us. And more importantly, give it to the to the Ethiopian authorities and say, okay, here's how you can use the story of Aksum and get whatever you want from Eritrea. Good luck to that. But I'm willing to learn. The bottom line is former empires can't do that. Ethiopia is not the Abyssinian Empire or the Aksum Empire, which is like thousands of years ago, literally. Forget that. But even more recent, the Ottoman Empire. Turkey can't say, I have the Ottoman Empire, so I own everything that we used to own. By the way, if that was the case, Turkey would have ownership claim before Ethiopia did, and for us Eritreans, maybe it's a menu of choices from our previous colonizers to choose from. But the bottom line is, historical empire is not recognized. I used to could is not an answer. The Persian Empire, which used to be much more bigger than what Iran is today. Iran can't use Persian Empire to make a claim. Let's say, assuming Rome is Roman Empire, you can't use that empire to make a claim. So the bottom line is that historical claim does not work in international laws. This medieval argument of what used to be, where things used to be, is not borders are current borders, agreed upon borders. In a lot of cases, especially in African cases, it's actually the colonial borders, because of all this complexity, they don't want to mess with it. So as far as any claim or story and narration that the Ethiopians or the leaders of Ethiopia do about colonial borders is legally irrelevant. It's as simple as that. They can talk about the which king and what prince and crossed which river and touched where and slept where and shook hands with whom. We Eritreans, as far as legal is concerned, we don't care. Neither does the international system. Again, if the UN resolution, and the UN Charter is not enough, and all these agreements and treaties with Eritrea that makes it legally what it is not enough. Let's also just take a quick look at the AU, the African Union. Again, why didn't Abiy Ahmed or his representatives simply go to the African Union and say, hey, we want to redraw our border with Eritrea and jump over the border and go into the coast and claim a territory. Can you help us do that? By the way, they are more friendly to them, to Ethiopia, than they are to Eritrea. So why don't they do that? Because they can't. Because that's not how it works. So let's take a quick look at what does the African Union say. We're talking about legal stuff today. So keep it simply, they have some kind of doctrine. I don't even know how to pronounce the uti possidetis juris. Is it Latin? The lawyers will tell us and make fun of me. But it's the colonial border. It's the what was the Organization of African Unity, what is now the African Union, holds dear to say this is what holds Africa together. If it wasn't for this, there would be 3,000 countries that want to be countries in Africa, and everything will be redrawn. So in order to avoid that, they said, except where otherwise agreed, if two countries agreed and they want to do something, it's up to them. Except where otherwise agreed, former republican borders become international frontiers protected by international law. This is a simple way of saying is what the Europeans drew and whatever, we will stick with that. That's what we agreed on. That's how it started. That's how the OAU was started. That's what Africans stick with. And a bunch of neo-Pan-Africanists who have this romanticized idea of if borders should be flexible and if do we even need borders, and they talk about all the crazy stuff, crazy stuff, because they are not willing to give up what they think is theirs. They just say that to dominate their neighbors and to create this fantasy system that doesn't apply. But at the end of the day, you get rid of that, you get rid of the African Union, and you start a new world. We are welcome to do that. But Eritrea should not be victimized because somebody wants to make an exception to the African Union. When the OAU, now AU, was adopted, they adopted that, I'm not going to butcher that juris something law, but it basically means let's maintain the colonial era borders. They were nice enough to say the Republican era. I don't even know what it means, but at the end of the day, it's the colonial era borders to prevent wars. If we don't do that, we will fight each other forever. And they were right, by the way. Topic for another day, but I always think that was smart thing to do. I know the founding fathers of African Union, they had the Pan-Africanism and the other things that they want to do, but the one that stuck, the side that won, is the side that says, let's stick with what we have, let's keep our countries, don't go crazy, but let's play nice, create a union. That's what the OA is about. And we're talking about Ethiopia. We are talking about Haile Selassie. And I think this image here is probably in Addis Ababa. And Ethiopians are so proud of their Haile Selassie and what he did for African Union. But what he did for African Union is basically his lawyers helped draft that agreement that we see here. Whatever they ended up with as an agreement, he was part of that because he agreed to that. And as far as my understanding is, the African Union charter was actually drafted by Ethiopians, including Eritreans like Dr. Barakat Haile Selassie, who has a lot to do with drafting the charter. But at the end of the day, Ethiopia is so proud of its African Union and so proud to say of what Haile Selassie should mean for Africa. If they want to mess around with that, they are welcome to, but they will need to start to actually challenge all these leaders and say, whatever you were saying doesn't apply anymore. This is a new world order. Brave new Ethiopia has started going to violate not only the African colonial system, but the entire globe. global because that colonial acceptance applies everywhere as well. And Ethiopia is a very vocal supporter to this day. But it can't be vocal at the same time be hypocritical about what this means. But what it's calling for is the collapse. Not only Abiy Ahmed, but any Ethiopian who calls for changing the colonial borders is talking about the collapse of the entire African border system. So is Ethiopia proposing that? Or is it always trying to confuse and hide things? But maybe they are ready for that. If that is the case, I think the first thing that you should get rid of is that statue. Because legally speaking, you cannot accept the colonial borders that created the African Union and proudly display Emperor Haile Selassie's statue in Addis Ababa as one of their founding members. And at the same time trying to create loopholes for Eritrea at the expense of Eritreans. And another hypocrisy, but then we are talking about legal stuff today. You will be directly challenging that statue that you proudly believe in. So what is poor Ethiopia to do? Because legally it's not trying, because legally it doesn't work. So what is for Ethiopia left to do? And even myself, as I defend the legal, how Eritrea is protected by the international legal system, what am I leaving Ethiopia with? I think it's what everybody knows, but for some reason doesn't want the simple, acceptable, easy. Ethiopia's access to the sea is already guaranteed by, first of all, it has the right to transit, the legal right. Now we are talking about the right. It does not have the right to grab, to dominate, to twist, to threaten, to do anything that cannot legally be defended. But if Ethiopia says, well, our ships would like to go to India, take our coffee to India and bring whatever they need to bring from India and back to us, and we would like to pass through the port of Assab, would you let us? To this day, can they tell us that the Eritrean government for the last 3 decades blocked them from doing that? Or was it part of their ever-going conspiracy to say, well, if we do that, then Eritrea becomes peaceful and prosperous, and that means it will be gone forever. That's been their calculus so far. But I don't want today's topic to be about politics or conspiracies. But this right for Ethiopia is always there. And even recently, we heard it from Eritrean officials. They have access. By the way, they have access to a bunch of other ports in the region, from Sudan to Somalia, to Somaliland, to Kenya. They have access everywhere. The UNCLOS, the UN clause, is the UN Convention on the Law of the Seas, and it simply gives Ethiopia, okay, you have the freedom to pass. It's like a toll road. Doesn't mean you stop and own and claim, or if it's a bridge that you pay toll for, it doesn't mean you own the bridge, but you're welcome to use the bridge. Whether the bridge owner charges you a toll, gives you a free pass, that's up to you guys. But you have the freedom to pass so that you can go to where you need to go. So Ethiopia has that access if it asks politely, nicely, legally, without endangering Eritrea. And then in the future, I don't see it happening now because you really relinquished your peaceful opportunity. But in the future, that's absolutely possible. And then the bottom line is, what is also available for Ethiopia is to use it for commercial purposes. Now, Ethiopia is complicating itself. It's not only asking for a commercial, it can't even do that. It talks about ownership and obtaining, and then it jumps the gun to say we're going to use it to do whatever we want. We will create a military base. We will create a navy on it too. They are just shooting themselves on the foot and all crazy things. But as far as Ethiopia and Eritrea and use of port and access is concerned, it's going to be commercial. And no sane-minded Eritrean government now or in the future is going to allow you to say, come build a military base on our land, even though you used to colonize us for decades, and make us irrelevant in our own land and on our own sea access. I mean, on our own coastline. No sane man is going to do that. But if it's commercial terms, it's a win-win. And like we said earlier, there's a bunch of legal agreements that could be done. That could be win-win. But this crazy empire building nostalgia that has no legal basis, it's dead on arrival. Which boils down to Ethiopia. It's like, okay, Eritrea could be your best friend or your worst enemy. Choose. So legally speaking, you're better off with using the legal avenue so that you can have Eritrea as a best friend. But if you think you can get away with what you started, it's a big mistake. Again, I hope you reverse course soon. Okay, let's move on, and we are getting close to the end. Now, what about precedents? Has any country actually have done that before of what Ethiopia is trying to do? We talked about what is available legally, but what Ethiopia is trying to do. Has anybody actually made a historical claim, regional stability or security or fairness, or our population is growing and we need to breathe argument, any kind of argument that we heard so far? Has any country actually has done that? The purchase angle, we saw it earlier, almost unheard of. But I'm talking about a country making a claim that similar to what Ethiopia is doing. Has any one of them done that? So let's, without complicating things, I think we can talk about two countries or two cases. And one of them is Bolivia versus Chile. And we're not going to go into this legal twist of how it's similar. And at the end of the day, Bolivia, which is a landlocked country, Chile. Bottom line is, Bolivia is a landlocked country like Ethiopia, and historically, it actually has a better case than Ethiopia. It used to have access to the ocean, and legally, I think it was in 2013, they went to one of those courts, the ICJ, and it took Chile to court and says, okay, we need to. It wasn't about sea access, as simple as, because sea access they could already have given them that, but they were demanding a sovereign access. We want access where we can actually control our own port, similar to what Ethiopia is actually making. At the end of the day, the ICJ, the court, rejected Bolivia's claim to say, no, according to the rules, Chile could let you pass, could play nice, but Chile has no obligation or to negotiate its own territory and give it to you. And Bolivia made all kinds of historical claims and fairness claims, and indigenous people have the right claims, like Mr. Smart, Dr. Abiy Ahmed tried to use the Afar argument, thinking like that's what the Bolivians did. But bottom line is the Bolivians lost that case. So there is no precedence. There is nothing that you can say, hey, other countries do it the way we have done it. So if what Ethiopia is trying to do is do it for the first time in world history, or for the first time in modern times, to basically make reverse and do that. Again, in the final ruling for the International Court was, there is no right to sovereign access, period. But there is right to sea access under international law. That's it. You have the right to use. You don't have a right to own, unless the other country lets you voluntarily give you what they have. This one is maybe a little less relevant, but again, there's another ICJ ruling into 2010 or 2011, something like that, between Serbia and Kosovo. Maybe the ownership claim is what I'm trying to. Another historical ownership. We used to own you. You used to be part of us. So you are us. You are whatever Kosovo has ports. By the way, Kosovo is not even a member of the UN, even though they declared its independence. But it was protected by the international system. It is that powerful. And the international system says, whatever Serbia, you can't. Nobody's allowed to claim, to use history and make claims. They also brought up about this national security need. If we don't let it, we will be invaded and it will keep us vulnerable, similar to what the Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed is saying about Ethiopia. That was also ruled out. So at the end of the day, even if you want to go legally, maybe that's the reason. Maybe those two cases, Bolivia v. Chile and Serbia versus Kosovo, maybe that's the reason the Ethiopians quickly said, no, this legal stuff is not going to work for us. Let's try something different. Let's try this media campaign of confusion and agitation and threats, and because legally it was as easy as starting with that, maybe 5 minutes later finding out, oh, this is not going to work, is it? So again, at the end of the day, with Kosovo and Serbia, the historical claim is not going to work. Security claim is not going to work. That was the end of it. Now, the security claim of what Ethiopia is bringing, it's not recognized by a country cannot say, I feel threatened, so therefore I need to grab land and acquire that thing over there, even without confusing what its historical claim, because Ethiopia keeps bringing about the need for security of the region. By the way, I don't even understand. Sometimes, is it saying some foreign invader is going to use the Red Sea to invade Ethiopia? Or sometimes Abiy Ahmed says maybe the Yemenis will, or the Houthis will attack a military base in Djibouti, and the Djibouti port will not be available to us. So therefore, now instead of saying, okay, we need multiple agreements with many countries, he jumps the gun to say, therefore, we need to invade and grab one of ours. I think that's his conclusion. But I need threatened is not an argument. Just like you can't, if you are at the bar and you punch someone, and then the police arrive and say, "Hey, I feel threatened." Well, even if you feel threatened. So, but more importantly, in the international system, you are not allowed to say, "I need the sea because I need security." It's not allowed. It's legally is not accepted. Otherwise, all strong countries will say the weaker countries, or weaker countries can say the strong country scares me, so I need something that doesn't belong to me. Or the bigger countries and powerful countries can say, we have a national security loophole here. This place here we need to grab it because it doesn't work for our security. That is not also allowed. So explicitly, legally speaking, security, to say that I need it for security, I need it for my future security, is not a legal argument. That actually protects Eritrea more than Ethiopia. But in our case, the security justification simply doesn't work. The bottom line, Eritrea has as we saw, no legal obligation to provide a port. No legal obligation, which means you can't go to court, find Eritrea guilty, win the case, and then tell it to hand over. Nothing like that. This is not a disputed territory where it goes to court of arbitration. Then another argument that Ethiopia brings is, okay, it has no legal obligation, but we are 120 million people, and we can't depend on ports that don't belong to us. That's also not an argument. If it's something that doesn't belong to you, there are probably many things that Eritrea wishes it belongs to it, or other countries wish it belongs to them. We wish the Saudi oil belongs to us. Anyway, another silly argument. And then, so anyway, if history argument doesn't work, security argument doesn't work legally, economic argument doesn't work either. So the argument that if they keep using Djibouti, it will paralyze them, it doesn't work. The argument that Ethiopia is a big country with no ports doesn't fly either. But more importantly, from the Eritrean point of view, Eritrea has no obligation, period. Because why? Because it's a normal country. Because no country should be asked to do what Eritrea has been trying to be forced to do. What Ethiopia actually overall claims is that it is a regional stabilizer. If you just let it, if you let the Ethiopia take over, it will do a better job than Eritrea did. As a matter of fact, it will do a better job than many of the other countries did for the Red Sea. That was part of their argument, that the Red Sea security, the Red Sea security bill will be better served by Ethiopia. Now, when Ethiopia made that argument, legally speaking, well, all it has to do is deal with the countries around the Red Sea countries, including Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Eritrea, Yemen, and other, I don't know who else is left in the coastal lines, Sudan. All it has to do is convince those countries to say it will do a better job. But those countries actually convened several times and repeatedly said, legally speaking, no, we don't need Ethiopia to. The coastal countries are responsible for it, and that's how it works. By the way, it's crazy. It's like going to another neighborhood and trying to administer things. More importantly, it's really literally trying to bypass Eritrea, and that did not work. And repeatedly, especially Egypt and Saudi Arabia and other countries, they have made it clear that Ethiopia is not needed for security in the coastal area. Another argument that it brings for this region, as Ethiopia brings, is that this region needs to integrate anyway. We need to bring, Somalia and Eritrea and Sudan and Kenya and Uganda and create some kind of regional integration. But regional integration is a cooperation. It's a cooperation between countries, between 2 countries, between 3 countries, between 4 countries. You also have IGAD there. You can do whatever you want. But regional integration anywhere is never a territorial transfer. When two countries agree to do business together, to integrate their economies, it doesn't mean they erase their border and then they become one country. Or one country doesn't literally hand over its cities and ports and territories to the other country unless it's a purchase or some kind of things that are different from integration. So Ethiopia is also trying to use the integration argument, but integration argument about the Horn of Africa initiative you can do it legally. You can do it, say, okay, let's sit down, all countries sitting down, working out whatever economic deal that they need to make. But that's not what Abiy Ahmed has been doing since he came to power. what he's been saying is trying to erase borders to say, he hides it behind መደመር ፍቅር ያሸንፋል, his kind of a smart of way avoiding what he's really selling, is what he's saying is that borders are artificial anyway. Yes, obviously anything in the political borders are not natural. They don't grow on trees, or they don't come from heavens. But he keeps referring to it. Okay, do we even have to respect it? Do we even have to have borders in between? What makes it dangerous is that if you don't have a legal way of addressing things, and then chaos becomes the new norm. So that's basically playing with fire. And in Eritrea's case, for every inch of its border that it has, it really paid dearly, not in terms of blood and sweat, but also it earned it legally. It prevailed on all ends. So for Abiy Ahmed to discount the border as something artificial and something that he doesn't have to respect, is not acceptable. But more importantly, it's not acceptable legally. So if it's not acceptable legally, what is left for Ethiopia to do legally? It boils down to two things, which is to do it peacefully and without trying to make Eritrea surrender what it has, and to do it respectfully, because Eritreans, I think he knows more than anyone in the region what Eritreans paid for what they have. It's not coming from ignorance, and a lot of the leaders and the military leaders, they do understand that as well. So for some reason, and what I don't know what is forcing them to ignore all the legality and just to think that they can make their own laws, or to think that it's the rule of the jungle, because if you don't have laws and systems and accepted norms or the internationally accepted way of doing things, what we have left with is chaos. So as we conclude, the point of this analysis is not to provoke anyone, but to clarify. Ethiopia's desire to actually have a sea access is very understandable, of course. And Eritreans, as neighbors, not just myself, almost all Eritreans, I should say, want Ethiopia to have sea access, a peaceful sea access, so its people can thrive and prosper. But just because Ethiopia has a desire to do that, a desire to own, the sea access is fine, but if Ethiopia has a desire to own something, ownership is not law. Just because, or a desire to have something is not law. And we also understand that it needs some kind of access and some kind of long-term deal and a cheaper way of doing things, or maybe redundancy. But its needs are not entitlement. Just because it needs it doesn't mean other countries are obliged to hand over what it needs. And it could talk about its history and all the empire stories. And as we saw, that history is not sovereignty. And only sovereignty is accepted legally. So from here on, the only viable option for Ethiopia and for Eritrea and for anyone that matter, but especially the only viable option for Ethiopia is not what it is trying to do. It's actually cooperation, not coercion, not forcing Eritrea to do something against its will. And it should push for agreements. But this ownership through pressure and twisting things and making threats and confusing the Ethiopian people to rise up, that is not going to work, because it never did. It didn't work in the last 30 years, in the last 50 years, in the last 80 years, in the last 100 years. It did not work. So they should stop doing that. And then if we are talking about the stable Horn of Africa, where Ethiopia as a big country can play a constructive role, you don't do that by creating false narratives. You create that by creating peace, stability, and cooperation. And by the way, from a distance, that's how you advertise Ethiopia. So go to that. At the end of the day, Eritrea will keep its border, will keep its sovereignty, because the international system, the international legal system protects it. And as far as Ethiopia can use Massawa, can use Assab, can use any of Eritrea's ports by mutually agreed agreement. In agreements, the two parties would voluntarily say, this is what we agreed on. And then if Ethiopia and its leaders will be trustworthy to Eritrea one day, I'm sure it will be possible. But whatever it is, it needs to be legal. Because when those two agreements, if there are future agreements, and if they fail, then you need to be able to go to an arbitration court or a third party, do it legally. Outside of that is not going to just be created. You create stories is not going to work. But peaceful, realistic, based on mutual respect is absolutely possible. And I hope we quickly turn away, make a U-turn from where we are today, or Ethiopia makes a U-turn for where it's taken us today, and we go back to that possibilities. But I'm deeply confident that the future generations of Eritrea and Ethiopia will be able to do that. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to your feedback. If you'd like to see more analysis like this, please like, share, and subscribe. The best way to support this channel is actually simply to engage with the content. I read all your comments, every single one of them. So feel free to share your thoughts, give me feedback, and correct me if there is needed, if there are any disagreements, or ask me questions. But thank you for watching today, and I will see you next time.
اسكت الشمع كبر عدلي عدي رأي خلاني أنس رأي خلاني الرأي رأي خلاني صباح طيكم تخوني